shares about those useful experiences with their own peers is one of the greatest learning experiences. And therefore, I'm eager to know about that as well. So, to start with, movement is not new to us. We learn to move even before we are born. Right from the time we are in the womb, we have learned how to move, to twist and turn and tumble and swim and so on. And what neuroscience research today tells us is that through movement, brain development is consolidated. Now, how do we understand this? Because when you see a very young infant, the first things that an adult does is to hold them, hold them in their hand, rock them. So these are movements that facilitate the integration of various aspects of the developing brain. And this early rocking, being safely held in the parent's arm or the caregiver's arm, is one of the very first experiences of how movement can help a child feel less stronger emotions. Humans are emotional beings, right? We have a variety of emotions: happiness, sadness, excitement, boredom, anger, irritability, and so on and so forth. And we experience them in a variety of intensities, sometimes very mild, sometimes very, very strongly. And it is the role of our environment and our early experiences that help us develop our ability to manage our emotions. And the movements that we experience early on in life are very, very vital to develop the capacity of the brain to regulate emotions. Hence, the holding, the rocking, the lifting up in joy, right? All of these activities are not just fun, they are a lot of fun, and they aid in crucial brain development. So, the second point that I wish to bring to your notice is how movement can be used for expression of emotion as well as regulation. All of us know, right? When we are happy, our bodies move a certain way. Our walk is lighter, our head is lifted up, right? And when we are angry or when we are sad, our movements are very different. Similarly, with children, I'm sure many of you would have noticed when a child is sitting in class, you can look at them, look at their movements to make an informed guess about how this child is likely to be feeling. And therefore, movement has a very, very powerful capacity for the child to express their experiences as well as to regulate them. So, which then helps us understand that by consciously choosing our movements, we can facilitate emotional regulation. Now, many of you may have worked with children across the school years, some from the um, primary school, middle school, and high school. But irrespective of which class they are in, many children look forward to their games period or their physical training period. Why is that so? Many children will tell you that that is because it gives them a sense of freedom, it gives them a sense of playfulness, it allows them a sense of relaxation, a sense of competence by doing things that are fun, at the same time demonstrative of their capacities. And therefore, movement is such a crucial element. Yes, many children will actually feel terrible and complain if their games period or their PT period is taken away to compensate for another subject, extra math, extra language. No, they feel it is so unfair because that movement is not just an option, it is so necessary. It is necessary for the body to retain its ability to focus. It is necessary for the body and the mind to process what one is hearing. Suppose I go on talking like this. You may be listening, but after the first 15 minutes, you will notice that your feet start uh, dangling, or you start twiddling a pen, or you start stroking your hair, right? We as adults do it because that is our way to bring back our attention when the brain is struggling to retain attention. So you can imagine the case of children, right? I have seen this in some preschools where when the teacher finds that the class is not really focusing, each child is doing their own thing, they quickly bring them together with an action song. And when a child starts moving their hand, moving their feet, moving their body, and they do it for about 5 minutes, you find that they are then ready to focus on what the teacher is saying as a group. So that is the regulatory capacity of movement, which each of us can find ways to harness. So when schools tell us that these children are in higher grades, we cannot give them time to play, we cannot give them time for movement, they have to focus more and more. As mental health professionals, we find it to be a huge concern because what it actually does is it reduces productivity, it reduces attentional capacities, it reduces motivation. Just focusing on studying from morning till evening does not allow the brain the ability to absorb. The brain gets saturated and the body is so fatigued. But you give them a half an hour break to run around, to play, to jump, to move to music. You will find that these are totally different children who come back into the class. We as humans were not designed to sit in one place for long times. With developing society, we have got into this pattern of sitting in one place for long hours. And today, medical research tells us it is so harmful. It is so harmful to be sitting for long periods in one place, staring at a screen like we've all been doing the last many months. They suggest take a break, move, stretch, bend, run, climb. Yes. And the evidence is so strong where they say that for developing children who are in middle childhood, 10 years and below, if they do not get up to 2 hours of activity every day, then they are at high risk to develop mental health problems, anxiety, depression. So, how do we break this cycle? It is indeed a boon that schools continue to have this facility of physical training, physical education, as well as arts, where everybody, both the adult educator as well as the children under their care, are given an opportunity to engage with themselves and their world in a different way. So, how do we incorporate this? Right? So, very often you will find that in today's context, children prefer to sit with gadgets. They find it comforting, they find it rewarding, they find it safer to do that. At the same time, when given a safe space where they can be by themselves with a watchful adult who they can reach out to if there is a need, you find that their self esteem improves, their problem solving ability improves, their attentional ability improves, their ability to care for each other starts improving. Right? And this is how early human civilizations worked, that they had created spaces where youngsters could be by themselves, explore using their bodies, and yet have access to adults who they could trust and come to. So the question is, could could physical education, physical training use that sort of an approach in residential schools? In any school for that matter, but particularly since today we are talking to each of you who comes from a residential facility, how could this be done? The last point that I want to mention about movement is again how when we move, our brain releases certain chemicals that are called as endorphins. These are natural mood boosters. There is no need to have coffee or tea or any other addictive substance to give one a sense of a high. Engaging in physical activity, in exercise, in sport allows for this experience to happen naturally. So, how do we encourage youngsters to get hooked on to these natural mood boosters right from the time they are growing so that this becomes a natural option for them? Nobody has to insist, nobody has to force, that this becomes their go to option and not gadgets and not substances. I'm sure each of you are aware of how big an issue substance use has become in today's world. Not just in India, every part of the world is struggling with it. If we have to understand substance use in a very, very simple way, it has multiple contributors. It's a fairly complex brain related condition. But if we have to try and understand it in its simple form, it is feeding the need to feel pleasure in a manner that does not take too much of effort. Now, how can we allow growing children to feel that same pleasure in a manner that is healthy for them? And how can experiences and routines built in schools play a part? How many schools do we have today where there is enough space for children to run around, to climb, to jump, to play games on their own, create their own games, create their own rules, and play it? So, those are two aspects where we encourage them to play an established sport, train them in known ways, and give them a space and freedom to engage in their own ways using physical activity. The point to remember is how all of this is linked to the mental well being of the child, which is linked then to their motivation to keep themselves healthy and well functioning. Moving on to arts, arts are also a form of expression. There is so much work today that tells us how um, expression through art has been one of the earliest ways in which mankind has found ways to share what they have experienced, right from the cave paintings. Yeah. And even today, you will find that very young children will start scribbling on the walls, scribbling on surfaces around the time they are 18 months, 2 years. Nobody is telling them to do that, right? In fact, a lot of parents would say, don't do it. You're spoiling the wall, you're spoiling the surface. But it is an innate need for expression through the body that gets expressed as art. And to do that, a child needs to have some fine observation. They have noticed something that is peculiar, that is interesting, that is worth remembering, and then they recreate it using their own abilities. And that is the beauty, that each child is going to recreate it in keeping with their capacities. Unlike math or unlike language, there is no right or wrong way in art. Every way is a right way. How would that perspective be if we had to consider that every way is a right way in art? That what the child is presenting is what their experience is and in keeping with their capacities. And of course, as art educators, you may have all discovered and have been trained how different kinds of media can be used to tap different experiences. Coloring with oil pastels, doing finger painting, these are activities that can help a child feel calmer as opposed to, let's say, working with clay, which can allow a child to feel more enthusiastic. Working with clay can also be calming, but I'm just saying how, depending on the context, one can choose different kinds of art media, not with the intention of producing a perfect object or perfect art, but with the intention of providing an opportunity to a growing child to express themselves, to get in touch with what they are feeling, accept it, express it, and regulate it as the need may be. Theater, poetry, these are also forms of art which work very well with middle school and high school children. It gives them their voice, a voice that they often find hard to discover and express in an acceptable fashion. But when they take on the role of a character, then it gives them the safety to explore their own different nuances. Poetry is also an empowering tool for youngsters to share what their philosophies are, to question things that they consider unfair or unjust, to communicate their dreams about their wishes, what they really long for. And what we find is when children are allowed these opportunities in a balanced way, when they are given these opportunities to engage in movement and arts in a free space, in an accepting space, along with focused academic training, it helps them bloom as well rounded individuals. And it goes back to how our brain functions. There are two sides of our brain, the left and the right. The left focuses on logic, problem solving, all the matters of um, the mind, so to say. And the right is the one that deals with imagination, visualization, creativity. And you will find when these two faculties are allowed to function together, then the potential that blossoms is so much different compared to only one which is focused on and which is the logical uh, problem solving mode that we very often get hooked onto. You would also understand how movement and arts really draws upon the entire person. It is not just from the head up as we do in thinking. It is about what you feel in different parts of your body, the different sensations, various experiences, and integrating all of them together. And today, mental health research tells us that this is so crucial. This is so crucial for a child to be physically, emotionally, cognitively healthy. And I don't have to emphasize the benefits that these activities bring in for social interaction. Knowing oneself and knowing others is brought about so seamlessly through these activities. And therefore, it is useful to remember that art allows for healing. And by facilitating art and movement, we are also facilitating healing. As educators, very often we look at the child who's standing in front of us at that moment. Yeah, very often. What is our goal for this hour? What do we want them to learn? What do we want them to demonstrate? But sometimes we will realize that every child carries their own story. And these are such different stories. Children who have been held safely, brought up with a lot of love and care and attention. Children who've been neglected and have had to find their own means to gain attention of adults. Children who've been hurt by their caregivers who were also scared, angry for their own reasons. Right? And therefore, each child who stands in front of us is not seeing us the same way. They're not experiencing our work the same way. They will not respond to it the same way. So, how do we, as educators, allow for that flexibility? How do we spot a vulnerable child? How do we encourage a confident child? How do we support a child who needs that little bit extra? I think these are questions also that we need to keep in our mind. Because at the end of the day, it is not about teaching them subjects, or it is not about um, making them perform, but it is really about guiding a person to grow. Yes, I'm sure many of you may have had experiences with your own students who have passed out, have come back and shared fond memories. Many people who are extremely successful today go on to remember their teachers from school. And they say, this is one person who could understand me, who supported me, who was kind to me, who believed in me. Right? And these are things that individuals cherish for life. And therefore, how can we provide those opportunities for the children who get to interact with us through movement, through art, in playful and in growth facilitating ways? Yeah. So these are questions I'd like to leave with you. And with this, I come to the end of the points that I wanted to share with you. Thank you.
Ma'am, we didn't receive any questions, ma'am, as of now.
Okay. So, what would you like us to do? Do you have any other questions for me? Or shall we wrap up for now? What would you suggest?
We have this one question, ma'am.
Mm-hmm.
So they're asking how to face the children from different backgrounds.
Right. Um, yeah, I think that's a very, very important question. How do we face children from different backgrounds? Now, before we look at how to face them, even for us to understand what their different backgrounds are, it might be useful to have different activities as part of your classes, whether it is the physical training or whether it is the art class, to have different activities where each person is encouraged to share um, their perspective. So, for example, if you say, what do you find most beautiful? Or what do you find most scary? Or to look at, if there was one problem in the world that you wanted to handle today, what would that be? So, I mean, any kinds of questions that um, you think can tap their unique perspective. Allowing a space to do that can help children become a little more comfortable to share who they really are. And then to see how each child might require a slightly different approach. One cannot be very different, given that you will have a bunch of children that you have to work with. And therefore, consistency in our own manner is very crucial. Children look for fairness and uniformity, right? So they find it hard when they see what they perceive as favoritism. So, from our end as educators, to be consistent with every child in our class, to have consistent agreements that if this happens, then this is the consequence, and that holds true for everybody. Secondly, to look at how, when a certain behavior occurs, you may invite a child to say what just happened. So, very often, as adults who are in charge of a class, we feel compelled to take action, that this happened. Now, I have to um, either punish the child or report to the principal, and so on and so forth. But inviting the child to say what just happened and allowing them a space to think about their own behavior can also help us deal with children who come from different backgrounds. Now, in our mental health work, what we have found useful is using an approach where we are firm. We don't let children do whatever they want. We let them do a lot of what they want, but we also say no to things that are dangerous, that are harmful, that are not acceptable. And we do it in a manner that is respectful and polite. Now, this is what seems to help a lot. When we discipline children using anger, what they take is the anger and not the discipline. It festers within them, it either makes them feel small and upset about themselves, or it makes them rebellious and want to do worse things. So, when we take out that aspect and we relate to them in a respectful manner, but continue to be firm, that is something that is helpful. Yeah, I hope that gives you some idea. And it might also be helpful for you to talk with some colleagues about how they address it, because each school system is different. The kind of backgrounds that children come from to a particular school can help us understand how to deal with them differently. And by discussing and learning from each other, we may also understand what works, what doesn't work. Yeah, so that is another approach that one can try. I hope that answered your question. There's another question: how to change students' attitude and help them to develop? Hmm. Yes, that's a very, very important question. How do we help a student develop an attitude that facilitates their own growth? Yes, how do we do that? So, one of the things we are learning now is to share the responsibility in doing that. You know, in our culture, in India, in many of the Asian cultures, there is a practice where adults tell children and children are expected to follow. It has happened. We have grown up like that. But we all know that when somebody tells us something, only part of us listens. A part of us does something else that we want. Right? So to engage children in that process. So when you notice a student's attitude which you find is unhelpful in some way, how can that be communicated to the student in a manner that is not harsh, where you're just saying, see, I notice you doing this. I wonder what's happening. I wonder how it's helping you. Right? So, where the intent is not to humiliate the child, the intent is not to punish the child, it is not to make the child feel small about themselves. It is only to say, hello, what is happening here? No, this is what I'm seeing. This is what I'm concerned about. And you will find that when we ask such questions, it allows the student to reflect back. It is not going to be immediate. It is not going to happen the first or the second time, right? And it may not happen consistently. One day the student may show a more positive attitude, and then again they may go back to something which is unhelpful. But by being consistent, by allowing them that space and giving them positive feedback, when you notice that, see, today you were very helpful in class, today I noticed that you were focusing, today I noticed that you did not hurt that other child, you were gentle with that other child. So when we give such feedback, then children know that someone is watching. Someone is watching their good deeds. Someone is watching them being helpful to themselves and to others. And that can help foster more helpful attitudes. Right? So, in that sense, oftentimes we do find, even in our clinics, in the hospital, when we have children come who come with a lot of problems, we have to shift the angle and say, what is the child good at? Let us focus on that. And when you start doing that, when you start picking on the positives, you will find that gradually the problematic things start reducing. And the youngster is more willing to look at what is problematic, to look at how to address these things. Yeah? So that is something that is helpful. Um, Particularly with teenagers, insisting that they have a wrong attitude or an unhelpful attitude, that this is not at all going to work well for them, often gets a reverse effect. Right? They insist that they will continue doing what they are doing, more to prove a point. And which is why we find that, particularly with teenagers, giving them that choice that if you continue to do this, these are the consequences I foresee. And if you are willing to adopt a different attitude and pursue a different path, these are the consequences I foresee. Now the choice is yours. Right? So, really sharing that responsibility with them and expressing your belief in their goodness very often can facilitate small steps towards helpful change. Yeah, so I hope that answered your question to some extent. And then I think Mr. Shankar Mantur has asked how or why some students only concentrate on studies and not sports activities. Hmm. Yes. Yeah. Why is that? I wish we had a chance to hear from some of you, hmm, because you may have um, more number of ideas on answers for this question. But from where I'm looking at it, there could be a few reasons. One could be that a child has some physical issues or has some difficulty in movement or coordination, and they feel less confident in participating in physical activities. That is one possibility. Yeah. So when we ask this question, we often say, what is stopping this child? What is difficult for this child that this child is not doing this? Yeah. Because very often difficulty is one thing that will hold us back. So sometimes we've seen children who've had asthma when they were younger, or children who've had some medical condition earlier on, hesitate to proceed with um, sports activities. This is partly their own anxiety and partly their parents, because they'd have heard parents and families saying, be careful, don't exert yourself, you'll get sick, and so on. Right? So that is one possible um, reason. The other is where children are constantly hearing that studies is more important, that they have to get good marks, and that is the only thing that will take them forward in life. Yeah? So when they keep hearing that, that also can make them stay away from sports activities. Thirdly, sports activities can often include a sense of competition. It can be uh, demanding physically, it can be a little rough. One needs to be more assertive to say what they want and what they don't want. So, children who struggle with those may also find this hard. So, in fact, there are many initiatives where sports is used as a way to improve mental health outcomes in children. Yeah, we have a clinical psychologist in Delhi. Her name is Dr. Nupur Paiva. She and her husband, they run a foundation where they work with girls using sports to help them feel psychologically and emotionally stronger. Yeah. So there are variety of reasons, and there can be a combination of reasons as well sometimes. But in any which case, what we find is inviting children to start participating in a very graded manner, in a stepwise manner. Come and do what you can. And when they gain confidence with that, then to initiate the next level. Constantly reiterating that we'll only do as much as they are ready for. And very often, when we do that, you find children quickly progress because they are able to take some element of control in this process. It becomes easier for them to master their own fears and hesitances. All right, then I think Mr. Puttaraj has asked, do we need to be friendly or strict with kids? Yeah, that's a constant dilemma, isn't it? We're always wondering, what do we do? As adults, do we need to be friendly or do we need to be strict? Hmm, yeah. And very often, the answer to this question for each of us will come from our own growing up. Right? So, if we have experienced strictness from adults and we have found it to work well, then we want to continue doing that. Or if we have found friendliness in our experiences while growing up, we want to do it. Or sometimes it can be the opposite, that somebody has had very, very strict parents and teachers. So they say, I will not be like that. I am going to be the friendliest physical education teacher in 900 schools. Right. So our own experiences, so knowing our own experiences, coming to terms with our own experiences is one crucial factor to decide how do we handle children. Secondly, there is no um, set measure that this is exactly how you have to be. Right. At the same time, like I mentioned a little while ago, being both firm and respectful at the same time helps children develop a sense of responsibility, a sense of safety, and confidence in their own abilities. So, saying that, well, you need to do 2 rounds, you can do it as fast or as slow as you want, but you need to do 2 rounds. Yeah. So, or whatever it might be. So, taking that sort of an approach seems to have a useful effect in the overall development with children. Sometimes it happens, no, in some schools. I remember in the schools that I have studied in, the physical education teacher will be looked at as the most strict teacher. Anything you do, they'll say, I'll send you to the PT sir. So sir will have one cane in his hand, and he'll have one strict look. So it's possible that there continue to be such stereotypes, set beliefs that this is how somebody should be. But I'm sure you will also find that working with fear is effective only as long as you are there. The minute children don't see you, everything starts again. When they see that teacher with a cane or a, whatever works for them, they're all very quiet. Quiet as mice, nothing. The minute that teacher moves out, then everything starts again. So, which is not what we want, right? We want that regulation to happen from within them. We want them to develop a little policeman inside them who will say, this is not helpful. Let me not do this now. It is more helpful for me to do this. Instead of constantly having an adult do that. And for that, having this balance between being firm and being respectful helps, is what we have found.
That's all we have, ma'am. No more questions.
No more questions. All right. Thank you, Miss Shilpa, for coordinating today's interaction.
Thank you, ma'am.
Do let us know when you hear back from the teachers, if this was something that was useful or they would have liked some different kind of inputs. So if we have another interaction at a different point, then we could incorporate that feedback as well.
Sure, ma'am. We'll let you know.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am.